Hi, everyone. This is Gigi Howard, and I am back again with my pals at EveryLibrary this week talking with another wonderful author. And you can always find me on my podcast where every week in Drinks in the Library, I interview a guest about their favorite book and we pair it with a drink. I couldn't be more pleased to be here today with Elizabeth O'Connor to discuss her debut novel, which is called Whale Fall. Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. Lovely that I've got my book next to me as well, so we'll twin.
It's a two-person book club.
Yeah.
Wow, I have to tell you, I loved this story so much. It was so beautiful. I felt it was so interior, but very engaging as well. So I'm just thrilled to be here talking with you today. And we'll get to the book. I did want to read this quote from the New York Times review. Whale Fall is both blunt and exquisite. O'Connor's excellent debut is an example of precisely observed writing that makes a character-specific existence glimmer with verisimilitude. Sorry. So that's a that's a long word. So anyway, tell us a little bit about the story.
Yeah, of course. So Whale Fall's set on an island just off the coast of Wales. It's set just before the Second World War in 1938. It's based on an interest I had in the sort of real life histories of islands that orbit the United Kingdom, islands around Scotland and Ireland and Wales, that kind of had evacuations or real depopulations at the start of the 20th century. And so on this island, we follow one island family, and particularly the eldest daughter of this family, Manod, who's kind of finished her schooling, has always lived on this island and is looking for what might be next for her. To this island arrives a whale, a beached whale of the title, and the whale attracts some researchers who want to come and study the island, its culture, and its kind of folklore and folk song and how people live their way of life. Manod starts working for these visitors, and from there, the story kind of charts what that relationship is like and the kind of impact that it has on her. Yeah, I think that's about it in a nutshell.
Yeah. And in addition to and then Manad, our protagonist, there's also the whale fall, which is the term for I guess a beached whale, correct?
It's a term for a whale that has died in the ocean, so underwater, and then falls to the bottom of the ocean. And the whale fall is the kind of new ecology that comes out of the whale carcass there. So the carcass is sort of fed on by bacteria, worms, small fish, large fish, and it kind of creates this new ecology on the ocean floor. So the title is relating to that.
Yeah. And so in the background between our protagonist and the two English culturalists that are here to study the island, we see the whale decaying in the background. What's the symbolism behind that, or what's your thinking with relating those two things?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think, or I hope that the symbolism is quite complex in the novel. It's really nice to sort of hear about the way people connect the whale to the island and what happens and the kind of different ways it can be interpreted. For me, the reason I chose Whale Fall as the title was that I really liked this idea of decay and sense of something ending. So in the whale fall, this kind of death of the whale, but also what is created afterwards, and this sense of kind of things that happen after a particular natural phenomenon or after something ending. So then in the novel, the beached whale, as you say, kind of arrives on this island and really impacts the way people interact with it. So you have children playing with the carcass or going to see it with their families, people seeing it as an omen or a symbol. Manod, the protagonist, starts creating these embroideries of the whale, which kind of connect her to these researchers. So I wanted the whale to sort of be about the way it starts off this chain of kind of new interconnections and new ways of the islanders to relate to each other. But the novel's also about, in a larger sense, kind of nature and the way we live with it. So this sense of how symbolism and how meaning gets created from this whale and its arrival. So I wanted it to be quite layered, I suppose, the symbolism, knowing as well that the whale has this really rich literary history as a symbol, going back, right up to the Bible, really, where we have whales appearing as these, really, really meaningful kind of disruptors of stories. So yeah, I think that is what it comes down to.
Yeah. And since you brought it up, if you had to pick your favorite symbolic whale, who would you pick?
I love that question. I think I'd pick, I'm going to be really boring and say Moby Dick. I think is probably my favorite from literary history, and kind of that sense of how much impact that's had and how many traces of that particular whale you can see throughout literature and kind of poetry from lots of different places.
Yeah. And also with whales and seas, there's a lot of folklore in your story relating to Welsh culture and the stories that families tell there. Did you pick that up in your research, and what's the connection, with the story in Whale Fall?
Yeah, so one of the big inspirations for Whale Fall when I first started writing it was a talk I went to by a historian who studied the effects of whale beachings in North America, I think in islands off Canada and sort of Nova Scotia. And this historian studied the way it impacted culture. So the way the whale might appear in folklore, folk songs, idiom, sort of the way people spoke about the landscape, the way they might have depicted the landscape in art. And I just found that really interesting. I think I'm someone who's really interested in nature and the way we live with it. But we often talk about it in quite a scientific sense, and sort of the physical or material impact of humans on the environment. And I was really interested in this idea that this historian was talking about, that there's kind of this cultural dialogue and cultural exchange between humans and nature, where we might take particular symbols and particular ideas, and then that affects the way we might relate to a landscape or behave in a landscape or treat it. So that was really like a seed of the novel, this idea of wanting to look at that sense of how we live alongside a landscape. And then in terms of whales, so I had whales. It's always, which whales am I talking about? Whales without an H this time.
I thought that was so clever, as whales and Welsh. I caught it.
Definitely unintentional, not meant to be a pun. But yeah, so Wales, the country, I had a family connection to. So my grandma came from quite an isolated village in North Wales, where her family were kind of fishermen and worked the land. And so I always had this interest in Wales, the Welsh language, which her family spoke as their first language, and remembering the kind of folk stories that she told us, which were so much about the place that she lived and the language she had as her first language. Yeah, so that was kind of where that element came from.
Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking a little bit about you talking about the connection we have with nature. And I'm thinking about the character Joan in this book, which is one of the ethnographers who comes to the island. And without getting too, I don't know spoilers, but talk about Joan's feelings towards nature versus our protagonist. Would you like to speak on that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. So Joan, as you say, is one of the ethnographers who arrives on this island to study the people who live there. And so she has a few kind of interpretations of the island. One thing she seems really interested in is this idea of rural people and how they might be different to her as someone quite urban and quite kind of sophisticated, quite educated. And she also, I think, has a view of nature that's almost quite sanitized. So there's a lot in the book about the fact that the islanders don't learn to swim because the sea is so dangerous, which is taken from a lot of the research I did into these islands around the UK. And the fact, islanders then didn't learn to swim because the sea was so dangerous, and also because the sea was dangerous, there wasn't much opportunity to actually learn how to swim. And so she comes into this world where there's a real acknowledgement of the kind of power of nature and kind of not to mess with it. She comes in as someone who I think sees it as something that can be controlled and tamed and kind of domesticated almost. And so she kind of maybe doesn't respect the kind of relationship that the islanders have with the island, and doesn't understand it because of her background coming into this island community.
Yeah. And talking about the island and the whale, and this story it's a coming of age story. She's 18 years old, and now, but then it's also an ending of things. It's the ending of the whale. You can see the island is having some struggles too. So tell us about the connection between all of, Marinette and the whale and the island.
Yeah, sure. You summarized it really well, actually, this sense of kind of ending and transition and how that applies to all three of them. So as I say, the island is based on these histories of islands around the UK, which often went through quite turbulent periods at the start of the 20th century. So there were some that were kind of formally evacuated because of changing weather conditions and because the young people on these islands were going to the mainland looking for a better life. And there were some that kind of just gradually became depopulated and now don't have communities living there anymore. So the island's kind of going through this similar transitional period where similarly the young people on the island are sort of looking further afield for what their future might look like. And physically the landscape of the island is changing.
Mm-hmm.
Am I back now? It just
Oh,
froze for
sorry.
me for
Yeah,
a
it did.
second.
It did. You are back.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, so the island's also kind of in this interwar state, so it knows there's snatches of kind of there being war in Europe, and yeah, the island is in this very unstable place where it seems like everything might change. And then for Manod, it's a similar sense of something ending. So she has just finished her education, and is starting to think about what might be next for her, whether that's what she would quite like to do, which is more education, getting a job on the mainland. She's quite ambitious, but maybe isn't quite sure what to do with those ambitions. And then fighting against the island's culture, which has more rigid gender norms, where she might be expected to get married to an island boy and sort of set up a home. So the relationship between all three is this sense of flux and sense of transition and sort of being in between two states.
Mm-hmm. And I wanted to transition just for a second to your writing, because like I said at the very beginning, I found it so engaging, but also very interior. I mean, you say so much and like mean this beautifully by saying very little. If you don't mind, if I can read this one scene. And this is where Joan and her coworker Edward are having dinner with Maynard and her dad, Tad. And it says, Tad took out his tooth plate and placed it on the table next to him. It did cause him trouble at mealtimes. He had kept it in to be polite, as without it, his speech was difficult to understand. I knew this meant he wouldn't talk again unless necessary. Joan watched the tooth plate intently, as though it might jump towards her. And when I read that, I could see it so clearly in my mind. So what inspires you in your writing and your practice to be able to write so beautifully?
Oh, well, thank you. That's very kind. I think a lot of the writers that influence me, for sure, kind of use a similar pared back sort of style. So I really love the work of people like Claire Keegan, who writes really, sparingly, but with a lot of depth and sort of things happening below the surface. I think, there's a few writers like that who I really admire. So I think a lot of it comes from that. It's a style that I think feels quite it comes quite naturally to me as well when I write. I'm definitely interested in those kind of tiny details and the spaces between things and things that are unsaid, and sort of what's going on underneath and what might be hidden within these interactions. So I think it comes from that interest in my reading and what I like to look for in a scene.
And when did you start writing, and when did you first realize that this is what you wanted your career to be?
It took me a while, I think. I was always a huge reader. I always loved reading. Since I was a child, I can't really remember a time when I wasn't a huge reader. But I think it took me quite a long time to sort of realize that writing was something that you could do yourself, and also that you could do as a career. Writing prose, I started that probably about 10 years ago now, and sort of starting with short stories, particularly sort of teaching myself that sense of how to structure a story and how to pace it, and practicing writing dialogue and creating characters. And then I started Whalefall would be about 6 years ago now. And it took me about 4 years to write, I think, because I was spending so much of that time working out how to write and how I wanted to write and the ways that I wanted to tell this particular story.
Mm-hmm. And this is your debut novel. What is that like? What is the process like from starting the story to publication?
Yeah, it's it's a bit of a roller coaster for sure. So I was writing this book, for about 4 years. I was writing short stories at the same time and sending those out. And I had a lot of rejection, failed a lot with these stories, but managed to have quite good luck, I suppose. So I sent a story to a journal called the White Review, which is in the UK, and it won their short story prize.
Yay!
This was in 2020.
Yeah.
That was wonderful. And then from that, I had a few agents contact me and sort of say, are you working on anything longer? Have you got a novel project or a short story collection that you're working on? And I was working on Whalefall at the time, but it was just not in any state that I wanted it to send to. I wanted to send it to anyone. I really felt that I hadn't got a handle on the story and that it wasn't where I wanted it to be. And it actually took me another couple of years to get the manuscript in a state that I was happy to send it out. And I remember in those 2 years being quite worried, actually, that I'd missed my chance and, I'd finish this manuscript and then people would be like, who are you again? So, but I finished it and then I sent it out and luckily one of the agents I've been speaking to took me on, and from there we sent the novel out to publishers.
Well, I like I said already, it's absolutely beautiful. I understand you had to go through some struggles and some nervousness there, but you did a tremendous, wonderful job, and
Thank
we're
you.
all lucky that you put it out there. And I wanted to bring up just real quick, this is I'm working with my friends at EveryLibrary, the only political action committee for libraries. And is there any experience that you've had in libraries that you'd like to share with our viewers?
Yeah, definitely. So it's really wonderful to be part of an event with an organisation that looks after libraries. I had a local library near me when I was growing up, and I used it all the time. I remember, just being there every weekend, pretty much, and having that Matilda moment where I'd read everything in the children's section and was trying to find new books to read. So libraries are really, really meaningful to me. Where I'm based in the UK, in Birmingham, we're having some trouble with libraries at the moment. Our city council is threatening most libraries with closure. I think we have 36 in the city and 28 are set for closure. So I'm part of a project at the moment which is trying to save a lot of them and sort of highlight how important libraries are to communities and to people from so many different walks of life. And I'm really proud to be part of that because it feels like I can give something back to a local library that really set me up to have a life as a writer.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that they're having that struggle, but thank you for adding your voice and fighting for libraries there and for all of us, really. So thank you.
Of course. Yeah.
And I guess my next question is, what are you working on next? What can we see from you next?
Yeah, so my contract was part of a 2-book contract with my American publisher. So that's meant that I can start a second novel right away, and it's been a bit of a different experience having a deadline and having someone sort of expecting a novel from you. But I'm working on my second novel. The short story that won the short story prize that I mentioned earlier was about the world of dog shows, and it was a world that I just loved writing about. I found it so interesting, so captivating, and I knew that I wanted to go back there. So that's what I'm working on at the moment.
Well, I look forward to seeing more from you. Thank you so much for taking the time. And once again, for our viewers, if you have not read Whale Fall yet, you have to go get a copy. Absolutely couldn't put it down. It was beautiful. So thank you so much, Elizabeth, and I hope everybody else has a good time. If you're looking for me, I am at Drinks in the Library, which you can find on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube. And once again, I want to say thank you to EveryLibrary for having both of us here with y'all today. So cheers.